Hi guys, let's talk about cohabitation, also known as living together. The question is, why do some people live together outside of marriage, and does living together lead to a stronger marriage? And in normal class, I like to have a good discussion with my students about this, and I'll tell you what they usually answer. First of all, they say, well, people live together because they want to share expenses. They live together for sexual access. They live together as a trial marriage. And does cohabitating lead to a stronger marriage? The answer is almost universally yes among my students. But let's get into the data and see what the data says. This is actually one of those areas where the data completely contradicts what everybody thinks. So first of all, students are generally right about the reasons for living together: convenience, sharing expenses, sexual accessibility. When people do this, this is not a long-term commitment, and marriage is not really the goal. Some people do it as a trial marriage. Hey, let's try living together and we'll find out if we're really compatible. About half of people who do this do end up transitioning to marriage. And then there's a third way that people do it. This is less common in the United States, but pretty common in Europe, where they basically are married. They do have a really long-term commitment. It's just that they don't have a legal marriage. They don't have a piece of paper. So you'll see this in Europe a lot of times. You'll also might see it with older adults who might lose financial benefits if they do decide to marry. Wow, look at this, a massive increase in cohabitation since 1970. Very, very few people lived together up until about 1970, and it absolutely skyrocketed. I find that most of my students don't know their history very well. What happened in 1970 to make all of this change? Well, it was basically the sexual revolution and women's liberation and the loosening of morals around sexuality, and it became more common and more accepted to live together outside of marriage. Before that, it was basically unheard of. You didn't do it if you were a respectable person. Now, attitudes about that have changed quite a bit. Notice this was one of those trends that Jeffrey Jensen Arnett talks about that created this new stage of life called emerging adulthood. Even if parents aren't necessarily in favor of their kids living together, they're not going to shun anybody over it. And so people will do it more often. So here's the answer to the question of whether it's going to make your marriage more successful if you live together first. The answer is, I'm sorry to say, no. Domestic violence is more likely among people who live together. Excessive drinking is more likely, and it's more likely that you're going to get a divorce if you live together first. So what the heck? What's going on here? Why are you more likely to divorce if you live together first? And let's take a look at this. First of all, the rate of cohabitation differs considerably across cultures. So there's cultural differences in cohabitation. There are differences in educational level. Lower SES lives together more often and in more relationships. Okay, this may be part of it. Okay, the answer as to why you're more likely to divorce if you live together first. It's not that living together causes the divorce, right? I mean, we clearly know that that can't be right. It can't be that you live together and that causes you to divorce. What's probably happening here is that the two groups, people who live together first and people who don't, are probably different to begin with. People who live together first, maybe lower SES, and so they're living together not because they're so committed, but because they need to share expenses. And so they go into a marriage situation with lower levels of commitment. People who don't live together first probably have a religious view of marriage, that it's high and holy, that it is something that you do not break. And so they already have a higher level of commitment to the relationship than people who went into it without that level of commitment. So it's not that the cohabitation causes divorce, it's that the two groups are probably different to begin with. Okay, so are there negative outcomes to kids? Is it okay? Is it bad? Is it good to be in a cohabiting household as opposed to a married household? Is there a kind of cohabitation that might be bad for children or a kind that might be good? That's our next question. So if it's a long-term cohabitation in a good relationship, like the kind they do in Europe, where they live together for a long time. They're basically married, but don't have a piece of paper. That's fine. That seems to be fine. But the way we do it in the United States, where it lasts about 5 years on average and tends to be kind of unstable, and you live together with this person for 5 years and then that person for 5 years, that tends not to be real good for children. Children don't like that instability at all. Our cohabitation in the US is the shortest duration of any Western country. We are a country of serial cohabitators, and the effects on children are behavioral problems, cognitive problems, and teenagers who have sex early and are more likely to get pregnant. So not ideal. All right, that's the end of our mini lecture on cohabitation. I don't know if that's made you think at all about whether you should live together first or not. I'll let you think about that one. Thanks for watching.